Hello, everyone, and welcome to the year-end Equilibrium Television podcast. Doing a little bit of a change-up from the Culture Core podcast title that we usually have, simply because I think the nature of the podcast has changed, namely in how infrequent it's become. So this year, we're just going to be focusing on year-end podcast, talking about the biggest events from this year. Um, there's a lot to talk about. I guess we can just jump right into the topics here. Um, I think the biggest topic by far would have to be the Russian invasion of Ukraine, at least from my perspective. In terms of world-changing level event, I think that this is going to change the geopolitics of the world for years to come. Namely, NATO now has an actual reason for existing, whereas before it was more of just a vague threat and a possibility. I believe that a lot of NATO countries simply just leaned into the fact that they might not have to worry about any kind of Russian invasion, and they really really leaned into those low military investment budgets and made the most they could of those while those were around. But now Finland, Sweden, and Norway are all part of NATO. So it's kind of checkmate for Russia in Europe, all things considered. But yeah, that's the most significant story, and I'll just keep rolling with that one. I think one of the biggest economic problems that is going to be an issue for at least a couple of years after this is gas supplies to Europe. And Nord Stream 2 recently was affected, more specifically, blown up. I'm going to see if I can't load an image here of that. Here we go. So here's a picture of Nord Stream 2. Well, more specifically, Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2. Both pipelines, there were leaks detected, and there was a video online that surfaced of gas leaking from an apparent explosion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And as you can see, it goes from Viborg to Greifswald in Germany. And Germany was primarily depending on that gas from Russia to run its economy. It was shutting down its nuclear power plants and coming to rely more and more on green energy, and to fill in those gaps for when they couldn't use green energy, nuclear energy aside, because that's also seen as dangerous and controversial. Now they're kind of stuck with what they've got here. I think they have one or two more functioning nuclear power plants in Germany. So this is just one small piece of a larger problem in Europe, where Europe's going to have to lean into their own natural gas reserves to warm themselves this winter, already in full force. And for next year, if the Ukraine war is still going on, that would be the next big challenge for Europe. So, that being said, they're going to probably pivot to US-based gas. Because of China's zero COVID policy, Europe was able to get a lot of gas from that region of the world simply by China not needing that gas. They could sell it to Europe, and those cargo freighters could make their money that way. But with China exiting zero COVID now, and Russia pivoting to depend its economy more and more on China, because all of the Western companies took their business out of Russia, when Russia invaded back in November 24th. Um, Now Russia is really leaning into tying in its economy to China, a little bit in India, Pakistan, um, maybe a little bit of Brazil too. I'm not as familiar as how involved Russia is with the Brazilian economy, but basically BRICS. I don't see those as a strong ally core. Possibly they might see some mutual benefit with their economics, but yeah, I don't see anything beyond that potentially. But anyway, so now Russia has been pretty much decoupled from the West in terms of economic exchange. Most, if not all, Western countries pulled their companies out of Russia, and there is a no-fly zone that Russia established in ditto from Western countries to Russia, so airlines can't travel through Russian airspace. They now have to go around Russian airspace, which costs airlines significantly more money, especially in some flight with some flight paths. Like if you're trying to get from the Scandinavian countries to India, you're going to have to take a little bit of a longer path around Europe, just so you don't violate any sanctions that Russia has also set up on the West. But in terms of the damage done, Russia had a lot more to lose by doing this with Europe than Europe had with Russia. Yes, Europe was buying a lot of Russia's gas, but the only leverage that Russia really had left against Europe was that gas they were selling to them. So, yeah, this pipeline is pretty much a pipe dream now, and Europe is going to have to figure out a new method of acquiring gas, both from the United States, developing their own methods of fossil fuel energy as an energy source, and then also, I guess, just continuing to pivot to green energy, which getting rid of your nuclear power plants probably isn't the best idea, especially quickly, but now Germany's kind of stuck there. So, and I guess one other piece that's interesting that is probably worth showing, the Institute for the Study of War is a great website. Recommend checking it out. Give me 1 second, and I'm going to be showing it. Okay. All right. Going to hide this. And we're going to show window capture. Here we go. Okay. So, Institute for the Study of War is a great website for blocking my face, but also just for really good information about what's going on in Ukraine. Sorry, I'm trying to get it to a size that you all can see what is going on. I'm going to dive a little deep into this topic, so if you're not interested, I'll end up putting a timestamp below for when we move on to something else. This just happens to be what I think is the biggest topic of the year, so I wanted to just jump right into that. So, right now, speaking in current terms, the Institute for the Study of War says that there's an offensive campaign assessment for the Russians. There's been whispers that they might attack from Belarus, that happened in February, but didn't end well. But for the most part, Ukraine has pushed Russia back in two major areas. The initial intent was regime change from Russia. They wanted to come in, have a 3-day war, have an air bridge basically going right to Kiev, which they tried. That's how the largest plane in the world was destroyed, housed in Ukraine. And that failed. They had to pull back. So that was the first major loss And then this past summer, I'm a little hazy on the exact dates, but around Kharkiv, Russia was again pushed back hundreds of miles into the east of the country. So really the only strategic objective that Russia has accomplished is the land bridge between Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea. And the capital of Kherson was another area where Russia failed, and they lost that regional capital. They had to pull back to the left bank of the Dnipro River. So, that being said, basically just trying to find a map, but that can be a little difficult. Trying to visualize here. It'll be a little difficult, but let me see if I can't. Ukraine map. Here we go. Maybe? Here we go. Interactive map. Perfect. I lost it. Where did you go? I may just need to re-add it. Re-add the window. There we go. All right. So here we've got an interactive map showing Ukraine. Trying to make it a little bigger. There's the key, if you're curious. So right around Kiev is where they initially went in, took a lot of territory, and they had to be pushed back because logistical failure, and they faced really stiff resistance from Ukraine that they couldn't maintain losses with. Later around Kharkiv, you can see in blue here, this was the next big upset, and then in the south around Kherson. So Ukraine has maintained the advantage from that initial push Russia made into the country. This survival has been has been made possible by the very generous donations of and investments of the West, as Zelensky recently pointed out in his speech he made to the U.S. Congress. Weaponry, manpads, ammunition, things of that nature have all been sent and have enabled Ukraine to keep fighting. They have the manpower and they have the will, which is really what is important, to maintain their autonomy, which again, Russia violated on February 24th by just invading and causing suffering and deaths for thousands of Ukrainians, allegedly their brothers. So yeah, that's the state of the war right now. I am a little curious about what they are talking about here. Winter is also a time when armies can advance more quickly, especially in Ukraine when the ground is frozen solid. They don't have to worry about mud. They can advance quickly across open terrain. However, for the moment, it appears that Russia's on the back foot and on the defensive, making marginal gains in the Donetsk-Luhansk region. Right around here. And that orange is where the Wagner Group, which is a mercenary band of basically Russians and convicts, have been fighting. But as you can see, a lot of the territory taken back since the early days of the invasion has put Ukraine on the forward foot. So this has been a huge conflict with thousands and thousands of lives lost or people permanently, damaged mentally, physically from this war. So this is a huge. This is the biggest war that's happened in Europe since World War II. So, that being said, I believe I've hit on all the main points for this topic, so I'm just going to go ahead and switch over to the next topic, which is a little bit lighter and also a little bit more positive. I wouldn't say lighter, it's a pretty big program. The Artemis program launched a satellite this year around the moon. I'm pulling it up now. The Orion spacecraft. It landed in the Pacific Ocean near Baja, California back last, I think it was December 17th, so about a week and a couple days ago now. So that's a pretty big deal. I'll pull up the web page now. Here you go. Quite a sight. So this is NASA's big push to return man to the moon. And this satellite, launched on November 16th, was a good test run to test the technology of present-day NASA, not when the Apollo mission was finished. And yeah, very, very big deal, and awesome that it returned safely. Get to see all the pictures of it here. Very cool. Very successful landing. Awesome to see. Now, in terms of what the mission of the Orion spacecraft was, other than just going around the moon, launching out, doing one orbit, coming back, outside of just testing it, I'm not really sure what. I think it was collecting data on some aspects of the moon. Partially reusable, so there you go. Obviously, since they recovered it. And yeah, I'm not going to sit here and go through the entire Wikipedia article with y'all, but just a cool update. And I know that the Artemis program itself will be progressing in the years to come, with each new mission bringing man closer to the moon. I think I've heard 2026 as a very optimistic goal for when the next flight will be launched. I think 2024 might actually be. 2023, they're sending another object up. I'm just not sure about the specifics. So I guess we can take a quick gander at the Artemis program timeline, the ideal timeline. Whole bunch of information. Okay, here we go. Contracting stage. Yep. Here we go. So this craft is designed to carry crew, but it didn't. I know that they've also been involving private space companies as well to invest in the Artemis program. Some other fun facts I'm aware of is that the rocket blast from this launch was so strong that it blew out the doors of the launch pad itself. So this is very powerful tech. The fact that we haven't done it in 50 years is 50-ish years is kind of crazy. It is true that competition and war being the mother of all invention, kind of speaking to the success of NASA initially, and then more so now. So, with China and Russia coming back into the picture as competitors, and the reason I mentioned Russia, even though they're kind of on the down foot, geopolitically speaking, is during the beginning of the war, there was a tweet I saw of a Russian bureaucrat of some kind making a statement that, it would be a shame if the International Space Station were suddenly to become, a falling object that comes and crashes down somewhere in the United States. That would be a real shame. I'm not making this up. I'll go ahead and... Wrong thing there. I'll go ahead and take a look here. Threat on ISS. Here we go. They are abandoning it. Well, they're threatening to leave the ISS. Cannot find the exact tweet at the moment, but that was something that was said. Basically, if they leave and they don't take up the tasks that their section of the ISS is responsible for, which I don't remember what that is specifically, but it would be a part that would allow the ISS to come tumbling down to Earth. It's basically a giant falling object that could cause some significant damage. So, there's that. But anyway, trying to stay positive. Artemis is on the right track. I still am not able to find the timeline. It's kind of driving me nuts that the Wikipedia article doesn't just say, here we go. Found it. Now I have to, every time I move it off screen, I have to find it and bring it back on screen. Here we go. Okay. So, all right, you got Artemis 1, successful, no crew, included the Space Launch System 1 block 1. Lasted 25 days. All it did was orbit the moon. That was about it. There was a live feed the entire time. Like, you could go on YouTube and just watch it up in space. That was pretty cool. Not something you could do 20 years ago, so that's awesome. And that's kind of cool that these patches are designed by the crew. So all the Artemis missions beyond are going to be crewed. And May 2024 is that date, that targeted date. And it'll only be 10 days. It'll be a 4-person lunar flyby. So I guess a flyby would be only going to close to the moon that's closest to the Earth, the part of the moon that's closest to the Earth, basically. And then the mission beyond that, a year later, would be a 2-person lunar landing. So going to be feet back on the moon in 3 years. It's crazy. The timeline of that compared to Apollo was about 15 years, I want to say. I'd have to double check that, but this is a pretty cool chart. It shows you the plan, how long it's going to take, about a month per mission. By the end of this decade, it sounds like, or it looks like, lunar landing, delivery of the IHAB model, International Habitation Module. Okay. So basically somewhere to live on the moon, and a lunar gateway. Huh. Solar-powered communication hub. Short-term habitation module. Can't talk today. So that's cool. We're going to have a base on the moon by 2027, theoretically. Theoretically. Of course, that all depends on resources, if things go correctly throughout. This first mission was the easiest thing. At least from... Yeah, going to space is never easy, but in terms of comparing to the rest of these, sending an uncrewed lunar orbit block around the moon, and it's the same module they'll be using throughout. So the same module that was used for this mission will now be used to send 4 people in a flyby, and it's going to progressively build. That third Artemis 3 is kind of a big deal, and it's kind of surprising they have it only a 1-year gap between. I don't know what the original planned launch date for Artemis 1 was, but a year turnaround for getting those 4, I guess it would be the same 4 people, maybe. And looks like they have a lander included too. It's a pretty tight timeline. I'll be impressed if that happens within the decade. But there you go. Artemis 1. And that's a pretty cool logo. Look at that. Pretty neat. Got red and blue, and then the moon is white. Awesome. Get some more details on how it was launched. Very cool stuff. There's a whole channel that follows this. The creator is called Fraser Kane, if you're ever curious about space news in general. But it's pretty impressive that we're returning out to space like this, and that we have systems that can detect asteroids and approaching objects to Earth and give warning. So we have like an early warning system basically now. So it's pretty cool to see things like this develop. And it'll hopefully next year when we have this show, we'll be talking about, you know, this Artemis 2 progressing as planned. But hey, look at that. You got a little profile animation here of that's wild. So this is a side view, I guess. Did a little flip, and I guess the thrusters are what brought it back this way to Earth. Huh. First flip, second flip. That's wild. All right, I'm sorry, I'm getting down a rabbit hole here, but this is pretty cool. You can go check out the Wikipedia page. Got all kinds of... Oh, look at that picture. That's beautiful. Wow. That was from this year. That is crazy. It's almost worth saving. All right, so that happened this year. That's another thing. Another significant news story, keeping it international. Queen Elizabeth II passed away. She lived a very long life. I have to Google everything now, but she reigned from February 6th, 1952 to September 8th, 2022. It's a very long time. 70 years, 70-year reign. It's pretty solid. And she lived to 96, which is actually how old one of my grandparents lived. So that's a pretty, got some longevity genes there for her. I know there's controversy around Prince Harry, I think. I don't know. I don't really follow drama news. I consider that drama news personally. I know the Princess Diana was a whole other thing, and that was in the tabloids a long time ago, but she had more humanitarian outlook on things. And the big thing surrounding her death here was the idea that people wanted the monarchy to end and just be done, which at this point, it's all for show. They technically do have power over the British government, but it's very ornamental at this point. I don't think anyone really thinks that the crown is going to take back control anytime soon, right? So that was one big controversy surrounding her death. But yeah, that happened in September of this year. Remember that happening? That was a big news story. I don't think the crown is going to end anytime soon. So there you go. Here's a picture of her funeral parade. Obviously, some people in Britain are honoring her memory anyway. So, there you go. That happened this year. Moving on to the next topic, very light. Wordle. Does anyone remember Wordle from this year? You probably saw it when I was switching screens there for a sec. But Wordle is a game where you have 5 letters, 5 tries, and you have to guess the word. And if you don't, you lose. The game tells you if you get certain words right or not right. There's a whole bunch of strategies that arose around it. It was a fad for the first half of this year, and then the second half of this year, it wasn't really as big of a deal. I've been playing it continuously. There's a whole bunch of different variants now. There's Setacordle, which is where you do 16 different wordles. There's Quadordle, I think is what it's called, where you do 4 wordles. There's Numberly, where you have to solve a number equation, similar format but with squares. The big draw to this was that you could copy paste your results in these emoji block squares with your friends, so it could kind of become this competition-like thing. And so it was fun. It was a way to do a puzzle and be a little competitive with your friends. Whole bunch of different variants. I remember there was a strike for the New York Times back in earlier this month where the workers had a one-day walkout and they asked no one to play Wordle. So that was probably one real-world thing that was impacted by the game, or was related to the game, not really impacted by, but yeah, personal favorite of mine, Worldle, which is where you try to guess the outlines of a country. I had a friend recommend that game to me very recently, as in like 2 days ago, and that added some fun to it. But yeah, Wordle was a thing this year. Before moving on to this next topic, which involves politics, I'm going to take a quick break because I need some water, and yeah, so in the meantime, we're going to go on intermission. I'll see y'all in a sec. And we're back. Back and ready to roll. All right. So, got some water. Got our next topics. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it. So, the U.S. midterms were this year. They were this fall back in November. It was predicted to be a massive red wave. Conservative wins all across the board. This did not happen for a number of reasons, which I'm not going to get into too much here, but a lot of the candidates for this past election were Trump-backed. One of which was Dr. Oz, senator who ran in Pennsylvania. There were a couple others. There was one senator from Colorado who was a person who was packing heat when she went into the Senate back a while ago, probably back in May, earlier this year. So that was fun. And then I think Herschel Walker from Georgia was another one of those candidates, previous football player. So Trump had a lot of backing in this past election. They performed about 8% worse than other Republican candidates on average. So obviously the red wave did not manifest. Trump-backed candidates did worse. And Trump himself appears to be being pushed out of the Republican Party. At least not directly, because that would never end well for anyone doing that directly to Trump. He basically just sicks his sycophants on anyone who does that. But the biggest contender who could challenge Trump at this point would be Ron DeSantis of Florida. So Ron DeSantis could be coming into the picture here for 2024. I've heard from conservative commentators that the only hope is for Trump and DeSantis to unite in a united front, which I don't really see happening personally, but it could, and that would be really interesting. Their bases are a little bit different. One of them is a little bit more, what's the word? There's a lot of words, but the word I'm looking for is very specific. Extreme. They're very extremist. So Trump's base is very extremist. DeSantis a little less so. DeSantis has the background of being a former Marine, a family man, passes laws in Florida with fiscal responsibility while at the same time having socially more liberal policies being passed. So helping school districts improve while at the same time passing legislation against LGBTQ folks. But yeah, so there's a little bit of a difference between their target audiences, but generally the Republican Party sees Trump as the problem, basically the Trump problem. He mostly because whenever he does enter the fray in political elections, his candidates underperform. Recently, his tax returns are becoming public knowledge. Like I think in 2020, he didn't pay any, apparently, from these reports. And then there was the January 6th riots and insurrection that happened last year, which is still a part of the courts and being pushed through the courts today for people being prosecuted from that. So that violence was also attributed and directly Trump was directly responsible for egging that on and not stopping that. And I believe Mitch McConnell also made a comment that we don't want extremists and white nationalists in our party. So when Trump has dinner with folks like Kanye West, and I forget the name of the guy, probably doesn't even worth remembering his name, Nathan something or other, I believe Might be getting that name wrong, but basically an overt white nationalist. Yeah. So when you have dinner with folks like that, probably pretty questionable about if the Republican Party, by its own words, would be welcoming of Trump anymore. So, with that being said, Trump also made a tweet, which I will go ahead and share here. Basically, the idea was the Constitution. What's that? He apparently sees himself as a god king as well, because he started selling NFTs that look, he's got like lasers being shot out of his eyes, and it's just nuts. Apparently they sold out. I know a lot of conservatives personally that I talk with who were very against NFTs. Like, what's the point? It's basically just a way to, what's the word? Launder your money, essentially. Or hide it in offshore accounts. Just buy NFTs. Well, there you go. I wonder what they think now. But this is what Trump said this year on his own site, Truth Social, because he was banned from Twitter. So with the revelation of massive and widespread fraud and deception, because the 2020 elections, obviously there was fraud, even though all of the fraud cases he brought up in the courts were shown to be wrong. There was one case where there was a basis for it because there was a clerical error in the counting machines and the electoral machines, but mostly bullshit. And working closely with big tech companies, the DNC and the Democratic Party, do you throw the presidential election results of 2020 out and declare the rightful winner? Or do you have a new election? I can't do a Trump voice. I'm just not even going to try. A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Our great founders did not want and would not condone false and fraudulent elections. Why did he quote founders? I don't know. Obviously they wouldn't, but this was not a fraudulent election. No evidence of this. Claim makers never presented any good evidence, hence none of the court cases went through. So there you go. You got Trump calling for basically just making a comparison, saying like, oh, well, you should just cancel the Constitution because there is no rules and regulations. People already just do what they want, which is not true at all. He's basically just gaslighting the country yet again with this tweet. But as commentator Kyle Klinsky, Secular Talk, has pointed out, the Teflon Trump era is over. The stories that are put out about Trump are swaying moderate opinion in the polls. His approval rating, I believe, is significantly lower than DeSantis and other Republican candidates. His only saving grace would be if the Republican vote was split so much internally that he was the biggest gatherer of those votes. But DeSantis is looking pretty strong at this point. So yeah. Another part of the Trump problem is, Alex Jones. His defamation trial happened this year, calling the prosecutor out on, oh, this is your Perry Mason moment. I'm not really sure what a Perry Mason moment is, but in the context of that court case and cross-examination, which is basically where all the evidence is laid out and confirmed, basically just to lay the groundwork for making a case about Alex Jones saying, well, a while ago, I want to say 2013, Alex Jones said that the Sandy Hook the victims at Sandy Hook were all actors and plants, and his audience, whether he directly told them to do this or not, basically started harassing the family and adding more pain and suffering to their children's deaths, basically. So, having to pay damages for that in addition to spreading misinformation that causes more harm, basically. So, funny moments in that trial as well. Nothing necessarily to do with this tweet, but apparently Alex Jones' lawyer accidentally sent the opposing counsel all of Alex Jones's texts that he shared with that attorney, and possibly even more cell data. I don't know how this. I don't know how you do that, but just a whole lot of really bad lawyer practice. Like, just why would how does a lawyer send a client's entire cell phone history unless they're incompetent and not thinking, or they're just being straight up malicious? A lot of lawyers won't even take Jones or Trump's cases at this point because they know it's career suicide. As I say, out with the straight up authoritarians and their disinformation campaigns. Kanye West is a whole other story, mentally unstable. And Alex Jones just basically gave him a platform to talk and make a bunch of inane points about his view on the Jews, amongst other topics. I don't think it's worth going that much into. That segment of the Republican Party is hopefully diminishing as time moves forward. But we'll see, because you never know. 2016 was a wild year, and it's still having impacts on the political cycle today because of the changes that administration was allowed to make. So, for example, Trump appointing another conservative justice allowed for the overturn of Roe v. Wade this year as well. That was overturned back this past summer, and a lot of backlash. The papers were leaked earlier in the year, so when it did happen, there wasn't as big of a uproar. But basically leaving it more up to the states to decide whether or not they allow abortions at all, which is just crazy. On the flip side, LGBTQ, or gay marriage specifically, was codified into law this year. So that is something that was a win on the flip side. But the conservative justices being the majority on the Supreme Court now has ensured a conservative agenda for a while to come, years to come. So that's a significant update as well there. One interesting piece of news with Roe v. Wade being overturned, in some states being, I guess at one map worth showing, states who reverted. Really, I just want a map. There was these laws called trigger laws, basically, that when Roe was overturned, it would go back to abortion being restricted or made illegal. I'm trying to find a good map. I can name them, but I think it'd be easier to show them. This is a very nuanced topic, by the way, abortion itself. I don't think anyone is strictly for abortion. It's an option. Most abortions occur in the first or second trimester earlier on. And those that occur late are for extraneous circumstances, such as the mother is going to die if this does not happen. But here we go. New York Times article. But I've been paywalled. Love it. Okay, let me see if I can Here we go. There we are. There's always a way, folks. All right. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen. Oops. Window capture. Here we go. All right. So here you go. This is where it's banned now. And this is as recent as you can get. This was updated 3 days ago before Christmas. Abortion is fully banned in Idaho, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Georgia specifically has a 6-week ban in effect, which means that the child, the fetus, could not be aborted after 6 weeks. So, one of the things that I wanted to mention about this piece of news from this past year was there are these organizations called Crisis Pregnancy Care Centers, CPCs. John Oliver does an incredible cover story of this topic. But the idea is basically individuals can contribute untaxed dollars to these organizations called Crisis Pregnancy Care Centers, where teenagers and other people who have not received education on or resources to have birth control go in, can get an ultrasound for free, and get other things like that related to pregnancy. Now, the trick to these is that they're basically pushing that they just have the child anyway, and it's basically another anti-abortion center. Crisis Preg, let's see, center. And there you go. Basically to persuade pregnant women to not get the abortion. In Missouri, my home state, millions of taxpayer dollars have flooded into these organizations the past 4 or so years. So lots of private money going into these non-profit organizations. So grassroots movements and monetary donations like this are what fuel maps to end up looking like this, which now you got the paywall again, but you get the point. So, negative piece of news from this year. Another big highlight from this year was Twitter was taken over by Elon Musk, bought out, hemmed and hawed at first. There was debate over if he was actually going to buy it or if he was not going to buy it. And then when he bought it, lots of people were instantly fired. The previous board of directors were let go. Twitter was not able to function cohesively as a website because all of this talent keeping the website going, specified talent, specialized talent, was gone. So all these new problems that came up could not be handled by anyone because there was no one there to handle it. And it kind of started going down the crapper. And then Elon introduced this idea of a blue check, which was instantly taken advantage of by many people. They would buy the blue check. One of the most significant cases was someone bought an Eli Lilly, impersonated Eli Lilly, bought a blue check, said insulin was going to be free. The Eli Lilly stock tanked, and the company was pretty badly hurt by this. Also, people who depended on Eli Lilly as a source of medical care were hurt by this act as well. So a lot of chaos was caused by his decisions, which were really not run by anyone. And Elon Musk generally isn't liked as much by people generally. There was a comedian, I forget his name, that he went on the show his stage for. Got a lot of boos. It was kind of mixed response at first, but his Tesla company has also lost a lot of stock value this year. So generally, Elon Musk's net worth has dropped quite significantly. Technologies that our society is generally moving towards, at least that company specifically, was hurt by his negligence, mismanagement, and general emotional immaturity. Although I will say that when he put up a vote to the people of Twitter as to whether or not he should stay in charge, more than, I think it was like 57% wanted him gone. He didn't really solve the bot issue either. He also banned journalists who had previously made negative news stories about him. So he had this big, appreciation for free speech that really wasn't real, because he banned these people he disagreed with pretty much instantly. There was one account that was tracking his private jet flight patterns, which arguably is doxing, and I can see the point on this, but yeah. The funny thing was that Mastodon, which is an alternative to Twitter, said that they would welcome these people who were banned, and Mastodon links were disabled on Twitter as being unsafe. So there's a whole lot of really questionable things going on at Twitter. And now there's a bunch of different colored check marks. There's brown check marks. There's blue check marks. There's green check marks. There used to just be the blue check mark, which the verification system for, it just didn't really make much sense. But now it's just an even bigger dumpster fire than he found it. Like, he basically just lost a bunch of money and wasted a bunch of time and caused a bunch of struggle for no real gain. I don't even know if he made an edit button. I don't really use Twitter personally. I'll use it to check on world events, live updates. That's the real value of Twitter, in my opinion. But yeah, so there you go. The Twitter files were released as well, which there's 7 parts to them, showcasing how the previous Twitter administration was shadow banning people and not showing certain people in the news feed. So Elon wasn't really an improvement on any of that. Anything, he just directly banned people he didn't like. So Twitter, dumpster fire previously, then it became an even bigger dumpster fire. Elon Musk caused more pain in the world, and that was about it. Also, I remember he initially offered Starlink to Ukraine for free, but then he switched to not offering it to them or just charging them for it. So, a whole lot of interesting decisions from him. Generally, the consensus is that Elon Musk is becoming more conservative as time goes forward. So, significant political news story from this year. Inflation has been out of control this year. It is nuts. Ever since really COVID was a thing, that has been a significant news story from this year as well. Carryover from last year. At this point, the Federal Reserve is trying to get inflation rates back down to the point where prices are more reasonable again. A lot of things could have factored into this inflation. Possibly the $1,000 check that was sent out to every American, and then other initiatives as well. I'm not saying that's all that did it. I'm sure that some people think that was all that did it, but there's a bunch of different factors, such as geopolitical happenings that were going on, reduced production and cheap labor availability in other countries because of COVID, because COVID was a global phenomenon, not just a U.S. thing. But borrowing rates have increased from the Federal Reserve, so that's crazy. I believe that the euro hit a 20-year low against the U.S. dollar this year as well. You can watch a short video on that. I have that pulled up here.
This morning, it's another week and yet more pain for the euro. The single European currency was trading below 99 US cents this morning, its lowest value in 20 years. And this is the main culprit. Russia announced that the Nord Stream gas pipeline, which directly supplies Germany, would be shut indefinitely. Worries surround the EU economy as gas and electricity prices look set to remain high. Officially, the decision was due to a pipeline leak that the Russian state-owned company Gazprom found. But the EU has said that Moscow is weaponizing energy due to the bloc's support for Ukraine. Meanwhile, the US dollar is riding strong as the American central bank, the Fed, tightens its monetary policy. The European Central Bank is now in a difficult position due to high inflation and a possible recession on the horizon. Analysts expect it to raise interest rates after a meeting on Thursday.
So there you go. Interest rates were raised by the Federal Reserve. The U.S. is
that deadly storm battering the nation.
The U.S. is actually coming out ahead as a main supplier of gas, so getting a little bit of an economic boost from becoming one of the primary suppliers for Europe of gas as well. So just dealing with inflation as COVID comes to an end this year specifically. Things really started opening up this year again. There was another booster that was introduced later in the year for COVID, but most of I think the Delta variant, which was the last significant variant of COVID, emerged last fall. And since then, it's been pretty much it's there, but things have generally returned to normal. People still wear masks in public, you'll see. Hand sanitizer is definitely more prevalent. But airline, I think that very recently, back in September or early October, I think it was like mid-October, Canada stopped screening for COVID vaccination cards at the border. So that happened as well. Speaking of energy, one huge news story was that nuclear fission, there was a breakthrough. Decades of optimism surrounding nuclear fission, basically people saying, oh, it's pie in the sky, it's not really going to happen, finally happened this month. I forget the exact, I think it was a California institute or organization. Bring it up here really quick. I meant to say fusion. I'm sorry. I had it written as fission. I'm like, I'm not sure it's fission. Okay. So, massive breakthrough, fission technology. The National Ignition Facility in California. And yeah, it was a 2.05 megajoules of laser light into a tiny capsule of fusion fuel, sparking an explosion that produced 3 megajoules, so 1.15 more energy out of the reaction that was put in. Very small, but very significant for energy use. as the world moves forward and energy resources become less available, having technology like this will be critical to keeping things comfortable as they are now, for everybody. So, very cool development. Nothing really beyond this, other than the future challenges that will go into continuing to develop fusion technology. Like it says here, the real potential of fusion is decades away. This is just a one significant breakthrough for fusion. So there you go. Began its ignition campaign in 2010, so 12 years later. There you go. Lots of resources to produce an amazing feat. So there you go. That was that story. Going around to the next story. We're going to go global for a sec, and I hope you don't mind if I just stay on this page. I'm just actually going to go ahead and switch to the me screen. Colombia, the country of Colombia, has had 5 coups in a very short period of time. I think it's been like, I'm just going to say a very short period of time, but another coup recently happened. The president was kicked out of power and replaced by a more institutional backed party. Not a lot of popularity there. Continuing to the next international story, the German government arrested a number of hyper-nationalist and racist individuals in the beer hall putsch number 2, as I've nicknamed it, arrest spree around the country. I believe there was a high-ranking military official who was involved in this plot to overthrow the German government, linking back to a German prince. When I looked to find more information about this story a while ago, I wasn't able to find too much. So that was a very significant story from this past year. China continuing to suppress those Uyghurs, and zero COVID coming to a close. They've had major hospitalizations as a result of this reopening that was so rapid, and they've experienced an economic slowdown as a result of this just general societal unrest because of the zero COVID policy they forced on their people. The Sri Lankan government was overthrown. That was a wild video. If you have not seen that, I can go ahead and share that. It was a protest. They got into the palace and were basically parading around the palace grounds. Go ahead and share that here.
Thousands of protesters stormed the presidential residence over their country's shortages of fuel, food, and medicine. CBS's Elizabeth Palmer has the remarkable video and pictures of what was a mostly peaceful revolution.
Tens of thousands of Sri Lankans started their protest at the presidential headquarters over the weekend. But when they heard the president had fled, they surged into his residence and marveled. In a country where the minimum wage is just over $1 a day, people wanted to look at this opulence and see how it felt, right down to a dip in the presidential pool. But overnight, the mood had been ugly when police fired tear gas at crowds who torched the Prime Minister's house, furious with corruption and incompetence that's left the economy in tatters and Sri Lankans short of fuel and food. But the Prime Minister has now promised to leave office and says the President will step down too on Wednesday. So, having forced their leaders out, the protesters were cleaning up the presidential palace today, hoping its next resident will put Sri Lanka back on its feet. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, Tokyo.
So there you
Good
go.
evening. Jury got
That happened in Sri Lanka this year. Shinzo Abe of the Japanese government, previous prime minister, I believe, was assassinated by a lone wolf-style assassin. He was the victim of a particularly backwards religious group in Japan. Not getting too into the details on that one, but Shinzo Abe was involved in this religious group, and the man blamed that group for basically unfurling his own family. So he took out his anger on Shinzo Abe, who was shot. Interestingly, there was an election happening near and around that time, and Shinzo Abe's party was successful and was elected into power as a result, at least potentially. Abe's party is a fan of an increased military spending budget for Japan, departing from their previously pacifist ways as a response potentially to a growing China problem, as well as a continuously threatening North Korea. So that was one significant event from this year, and a result from that is the Japanese government is going to continue to bolster their military. In France, Macron was re-elected. He was a centrist. He secured an impressive 58.5% of the vote over the nationalist populist Marine Le Pen, which is in the same direction as the U.S. with Joe Biden, who is more of a centrist and a moderate, being elected here over Trump. So similar pattern as France is in here in the U.S. And lastly, from around the world, Turkey, the country of Turkey, wants to be officially recognized as Turkiye, Turkiye. And that is their new name according to the UN register as well. So we should all be calling Turkey Turkiye. That is all I had for this 2023 year-end podcast. There were undoubtedly stories I missed from this year. And reflecting back on this past year personally, it's been quite busy. I've really only had the chance to release 3-ish new videos. I'd like to kind of provide some context for channel updates going into the new year. The hope is always that I'm able to spend a little bit more time and energy creating videos as a hobby, something that I enjoy doing, but also keeping in mind that I have lots of other things going on in my life. So I will do what I can wherever I can. So I hope you enjoyed this year-end review podcast. I hope you all had a good Christmas if you celebrate that. Have a happy holidays for those still celebrating. And that you all have a great 2023. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all later. Ciao.